When you think of the word margins, where does that point you? How often would you say you're vulnerable with yourself? Poetic vulnerability allows us to effectively, healthily confront ourselves. All right, so thank you all for coming here. I'm really excited about this. Just a brief introduction. My name is Noah Fischbach. I'm a poet and writer based in Columbus native, but currently I am up northwest in Findlay, pursuing my master's degree in rhetoric and writing. And then I also got my bachelor's from Capitol University in creative writing, journalism, all that fun stuff. And today, my conversation is going to be about poetry in the margins, resilience, emancipation, and imagination. And so, just a little bit of a primer to get us started. I want you to think for a moment and write down 3 different aspects of your identity that make you you. Basically, if these were taken away, that you would realize, this is no longer who I know myself to be. I'm no longer being authentic. I know, big question to start us off, but...
It's a question where you have to really know yourself to be able to answer well.
If you need a moment to write more, that's okay. We'll come back to these later on in this conversation. But a lot of what I want us to kind of be reflecting on, focusing on, is kind of how our identity shapes us, shapes our interactions with the world, particularly our poetic interactions. And so, kind of beginning with, poetry in the margins. When you think of the word, so we've obviously, in person, online, and all forms of media, we've been hearing lots of, discourse on, on kind of like marginalization, oppression, inclusion, all these related words. So when you think of the word margins, where does that point you?
This is an open-ended one.
Yes.
So margins as opposed to the other buzzwords of marginalized or marginalization. Margins in me, because I'm a bookie and I grew up in books, margins to me means writing something in the space between the edge of the page and the edge of the writing. And margins to me is an open space between what was said and what can I say. That's what margins is to me.
Okay. Does anyone else have, a perspective that they'd like to share?
I love what you just said, because when I used to teach creative writing to international students, and we would talk about marginalized voices, marginalized communities, stuff like that, I would always talk about the margins of a paper and open up Word, right, and be like, these are the margins. So when we talk about somebody who's marginalized, they are pushed to the edges of the space.
What is your name, sir?
My name is Nathan.
Nathan? Yeah, Nathan, I like very much what you said about margins being open spaces. And I'm thinking of Billy Collins' poem Marginalia. You guys know that? When I was, whenever I would teach writing, and particularly writing paired with reading, I always encouraged my students to write in their books. And one of my most valuable possessions is a biography of Ernest Hemingway that was owned by a Cleveland artist named Alan Fenton. And the Marginalia is as complete as the text of the biography. His life story is in the margins.
Wow.
So open space for voice.
Yeah, I really like, these, the idea of margins as these open spaces. Yeah, for me, it kind of is similar. I would word it kind of as these boundaries, borderlines, where, things kind of begin to kind of blur and make these open spaces for new possibilities. For me, in my own personal, research and reading and such, I've been influenced a lot by Donna Haraway, In particular, I have a couple quotes I want to briefly read here. The first is from Gloria Anzaldúa, her concept of la mestiza, where it says that cradled in one culture, sandwiched between two cultures, straddling all three cultures and their value systems, la mestiza undergoes a struggle of flesh, a struggle of borders, and inner war. And then, stemming from Haraway, there's a writer named Julieta Cook who says that, and so essentially, I really like Haraway's metaphor of the cyborg to, she uses it primarily in the context of women, but there's obviously a lot more potential there. And what Cook says is that caught between worlds and caught between varying promises of progress and definitions of science, deviant bodies struggle then to negotiate belonging within these realms. And for me, when I think of the margins, I think of my own experiences primarily as a neurodivergent man, professionally diagnosed on the autism spectrum, and who was not diagnosed until 18 years old. So there's definitely been a lot of kind of this, struggle of flesh, struggle of borders, this understanding of, deviant bodies and realms. And so, kind of following that, I want to invite you all to try and recall a moment when you saw yourself more clearly, maybe for the first time, or a time where you felt a deep shift in how you understood yourself. It could be either when your identity felt empowered or whether it felt challenged. And, as you think of that, you don't need to describe what that situation was, but if anyone would be willing to share kind of what that felt like, or how that affected kind of your perception of yourself and the world.
Oh, my identity shifted in college, where back in high school and through my youth, I was mostly taken care of. I had a loving family and loving parents and loving brother and extended family. And then I go to the next state over and I rarely see them. And now I'm on my own. I'm here on this college campus. I am the master of my own schedule, and if I don't get to class, I will not graduate. If I don't drive my life, now that I'm over 18, in college, on my own, not relying on my parents anymore, now it's sink or swim. So before, where I was loose with my schedule, where I always felt that things were just going to work out for me, when I felt that I could fly by the seat of my pants and by the thoughts in my head, no longer was that the case, because my world had shifted to a much more unsupported one, where I make my own supports, I make my own structure. And so I had to flip a switch to become from a more adaptable person to a person who can plan, to a person who can organize, because I needed that for myself to succeed. And so I switched.
Well, my story, whatever, I'll be 80 very soon.
Wow.
And in the last 3 years is the first time I've been single. So I'm kind of serial monogamist, right? But it is also the first time since I was born that I have had my own bed, which, or I should put it differently, slept alone. Right? So it's a challenge, I will say, but I am kind of purposely trying to pursue that because I think it's important for my own self-identity to take that path. So I like your inspiration of finding resources to help, because we have to do that.
Yeah, it's not always easy to recognize when you need to find those resources. It's really easy to just say, I'm fine the way I am, and ignore the signs. And it's very difficult to move yourself when you know you need to. And that calling card is important. May we always see it when it happens.
Yeah. It's interesting to me how the two stories here are being empowered because you were challenged.
Yeah.
And my story is similar in some ways, where I had a lot of straight privilege because I was in a long-term relationship that looked straight until it no longer was. My spouse transitioned, and so all of a sudden that straight privilege is gone. And that's a whole different way of moving in the world, of like, oh, I am no longer safe in a lot of spaces and communities. And but it empowered me to really take hold of my identity and own it for myself, and it invited me to be more fully myself in my community as well.
So your husband's transition affected...
Well, my wife.
Well, your wife now.
Yeah.
Your wife's transition affected your life and your identity.
Sure.
How did you grapple with, I love this person. This person is affecting me right now. It's not necessarily in a good way because I have to restructure how I look at the world. Maybe I'm not so safe in these parts.
Yeah.
How did that change, or did it change at all? The dynamic between you two, did it present any new challenges?
I mean, hopefully in healthy relationships, you're always adapting to each other. Because hopefully you're always growing, right? Hopefully you're not just staying the same for decades, you know? But is this a dramatic one? Yes. Did it come at a time where most of society is really not a safe space for queer and trans people? Yeah, absolutely. But the not good part is from the outside of us, not from us.
Yeah, as we can see, there's many ways in which, our circumstances and situations empower us, and which ones, we have to, wrestle against, certain things, especially in a day and age, with, internet and, all sorts of views being proliferated all at once. I remember in our first session we briefly discussed, what would Orwell think, with the internet here and all that. But yeah. Yeah. So kind of moving a little bit further, raise your hand. So this will be a bit of a general question. Raise your hand if you consider identity often in your daily life.
Oh, yeah. Identity is everything to me.
Fair enough. And then, could be a little more specific. Raise your, or actually, it's not going to be a raise your hand, but how often would you say you're vulnerable with yourself?
Vulnerable in terms of being honest with yourself?
Yeah, that's kind of along the lines I consider.
Okay.
Honest about certain parts, for example, my faults. Being vulnerable puts me in a position where I could be harmed. That's the nature of becoming vulnerable. And if I'm going to be vulnerable to myself, then that means I'm putting myself in a position where I can hurt myself. If I'm vulnerable, I expose my faults to myself and I'm honest with myself, and I'm not in the right headspace to deal with, I have these faults. Well, I could put myself down for these faults. If I put myself down for these faults, it hurts to be vulnerable, and it does damage. Being vulnerable with myself is not something that I can always do.
Sometimes we just gotta wash the dishes and take out the trash.
No, don't call me out like that.
I think I'm in a state of perpetual vulnerability with myself. I don't think vulnerability with myself is the impediment to anything that I do. I think vulnerability with my either environment or people, or other people, is kind of the thing that kind of comes into question, because I think that I am my thoughts, so it's it's kind of I don't know that I can not be vulnerable with myself. I can work to be less harmful when it comes to how I am interrogating those thoughts and things like that. But I don't think that. Yeah, I think that I am the person inside of the armor, You know what I mean? So it's like, because I am in here, it's like, it's not, my issue is not like the person that's inside of it. It's like whether or not I'm going to expose myself to the elements, I guess.
Yeah, and yeah, Nate, I definitely want to understand. Yeah, I definitely see kind of like, vulnerability being, I have these struggles, and I'm not sure how to deal with them. I'll admit in this particular context, I'm considering vulnerability as, the process of understanding yourself and having, a healthy way of kind of like processing through those things. But I definitely do not want to devalue, the times where vulnerability means it's difficult. And kind of the reason I bring up vulnerability, in how it kind of again relates to poetry in the margins, I think we can pretty much all agree that quality poetry is born from a place of vulnerability. Because if we're not vulnerable with ourselves, then our writing is going to reflect that. And if we're not honest with ourselves, we really can't quite tap into that natural source of inspiration or that muse, because we won't be letting it drive us. And what I think is especially important is that poetic vulnerability allows us to effectively, healthily confront ourselves and work towards creatively disrupting external imagined realities. So basically, it helps us affirm ourselves. And, we live in a day and age where, again, with, all sorts of discourse all over the place, there's, about being raged on, what does it mean to be true to yourself? And I'll agree that, there are healthy ways and unhealthy ways to do that. Here I am mainly focusing on poetry, which hopefully should be a mostly healthy way to do that. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the word resistance.
Oh, it can mean a lot of things.
Yes, yes. Particularly, we've been hearing it a lot lately. Like, I know I'm repeating again. We've heard it a lot, said a lot, but that's just the case. For a lot of work on what does it mean to resist, and that usually refers to particular powers or structures that we feel are oppressive or making things unequal. And I want to shift our focus maybe a bit more to the word resilience, because I don't know how often we might consider that. And for me, resilience means it's kind of like a shield, building courage and strength amidst adversity. And so, what might it look to you to be resilient?
Well, from one of the earlier sessions we had, one of the women had a shirt on and it said, "Behind every strong woman is a issue that made her have to be."
Yeah.
Something, I'm not quoting it right,
true.
but it's true. And I think that, was it Pooh that said, courage is not fear, courage is going ahead anyway. Yeah, so I kind of define resilience as pluckiness.
Yeah.
I find resilience is something that is built up. Something that is built up against adversity that you had faced before. That I face this adversity again. But because I had faced it before, I understand how to respond now, and so I have become more resilient. I thought of this as you were speaking.
That's all right.
It is great that you put vulnerability next to resilience under poetry. Because as you were speaking, I had realized that through poetry, we bear our vulnerabilities, and that is how it becomes resilience. That we bear our vulnerabilities, we come to understand our vulnerabilities. And then out of that, when we face adversity that strikes our vulnerabilities again, by then we had become resilient to it. Because we had bared our vulnerabilities before. And that is the magic of poetry. And that is what I thought of as you were speaking. I'm so glad you put those words together.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you were able to glean the meaning from that. And so then, kind of moving on from resilience, I have a word that I want to acknowledge that it has its primary use is in a particular context. The word being emancipation. It has that historical use in in anti-slavery, being primarily directed towards people of color and so forth. And the way that I want to use that word here today is similar to liberation. Kind of with that, I feel like emancipation is it's a bold word, and emancipation and liberation, you kind of have get this mental image of kind of breaking out of something, whether it be metaphorical chains. How can you use poetry to be liberatory or to be emancipatory?
Through insight, poetry emancipates the reader. And when I say that, I mean the insights that are gleaned from poetry. Unfortunately, I can't name very many poems or poets myself, other than one in particular. There are insights presented in the poem's reflections, which bring light to, I'm going to go back to it again, vulnerabilities. And that's where that insight brings emancipation, is by enlightening vulnerabilities. Now I know I have this problem because I didn't want to face it before, but now here's a way to face it through the insights found in this poetry, through the truth that I've read through this poetry. And I've experienced a similar thing in a sermon, in Sunday church service, where this is a truth. This is a truth that I had been aching for a while, and now hearing this truth, I feel free. And much in the same way do the insights presented in poetry emancipate the reader, by giving those insights and by delivering truth. I should probably write that down.
Curious if anyone else has anything to add on that.
What was the question anyway?
Yeah, I don't have a question written down. I just popped it on my head. It's basically...
I think the only way we get free is by being vulnerable with ourselves, with our art, and with each other. Because the only way we get free is together. And we can't actually be together if we're not being vulnerable with each other. If we've all got masks on and armor on, then we're not free to be ourselves, and we can't empower each other, right?
Yeah, kind of as an neurodiverse person, understanding what it means to unmask. Yeah, it's very powerful for me.
I think the important thing about vulnerability is it increases the resolution to kind of whatever dynamic that you're talking about. So as opposed to just having kind of a very surface level understanding of somebody's experience, if you're able to increase the vulnerability that you're expressing in the experience, you might be able to access more specifics that more people can have a stronger attachment to.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, because people don't have language for how they feel or their experience, it's like tying them down to whatever that experience is. Whereas if you see it all the time, you'll go to an open mic and somebody that you have never seen before in your entire life, they'll do a poem and then it'll really intense, everybody else will be they can access that it's a good poem, they like the poem, they like the reader, they like the performance, whatever, but there'll be somebody who it very intensely reached, and it'll be because whatever happened in their day, in their life, and what their experiences, that poem or that experience really spoke to them. So if we're able to, in our work, I think, and one of the things I try to do in my work, and I think, I've been inspired to do by a lot of writers that either I am contemporaries with or that I've just been able to read just in general, what they're attempting to do is have a level of vulnerability with their experience that pushes it out of a generality and makes it like a very specific, like you can see what they're going through, you can kind of feel what's happening in their world, because somebody else is not going to be able to really access the generality, but they're going to be able to really see the specifics. So.
Yeah, I really like the way you phrase that. Like understand, like having that specific language. Yeah. I know. Yeah, and for me again, my story, having that specific language to, go further than my base experience. Was definitely very very liberating in that. And so, going to the, not the last thing we'll be talking about, but the last kind of major point, imagination. And, for me, imagination, the core of it is simply embracing creativity and passion. And the other week, I was interviewing a former college professor of mine, just for an assignment on just how he teaches writing. And he spoke a lot about, what he saw as kind of like threats to writing. He cited, increasing awareness of fascism, anti-intellectualism, AI. And so how do you see yourself using imagination in a world progressively dominated with kind of, AI, where, and, the funding of, public media and so forth?
Oh my. So if I may kick that one off. AI is here. AI is here to stay. It's not going to be going on anywhere. And honestly, I would put stock into it on the stock market, because we're only going to be doing more with AI as we go. That said, the fault of AI when it comes to creation is that it does not create. The nature of AI is it takes all of the world's information and puts it into an answer. That answer only comes from existing information. It does not create anything new. AI is a useful tool for learning and for creating an image that may or may not look creative. It is not. The creativity comes through a human element. I would say that how we should interact with AI as creative people, as writers, as poets, as artists, is to start with maybe an AI image, or start with maybe an AI prompt that gives us an idea. And then we take that idea and we run with it, and we put our vulnerabilities into it. We put our resilience into it. We put our insight into it. We make that idea ours, and then whatever could have been construed as AI was left at that starting point, and the rest is human. I don't feel AI is a threat, but an idea giver.
I think AI is something we're all going to have to learn to struggle with, because it's just in its infancy. And so how I feel about it today may not be how I feel about it down the road. I have found that if I use it to critique a poem or something, the darn thing is very flattering. And I think it is designed to be that
Yeah, the
way.
fake flatterers.
It is designed to be that way, which is a hook. And I think there's a lot of potential for evil. So I stand back a little bit, because I don't know, it's not something I think that anyone right now can predict what's going to happen, and I certainly hope that there are people that have some control.
I don't want to sound dystopic, but I'm going to. I think your question, Noah, how do you see yourself using imagination in your life, given the environment that we're in? I think that we have to be systems thinkers and imagine ulterior motives all the time.
Definitely.
Keep your humans close.
And Gwen, I nearly thought I heard you begin to say something, but...
Are you reading my mind now? I've always had like a crazy imagination, and I sometimes wonder if it's because I had so much boredom in my childhood. Like, we didn't have a TV for most of my growing up. My family was really poor, so we didn't go places. My schedule was not packed, right? Like, we weren't doing tons of things all the time. We were bored, and then we would just make up stuff, right? So, like, my brothers, our friends, neighbors, like, we were constantly making up stories in lots of different ways all the time. And it makes me really sad when I see that kids, like, don't have that, like, playtime and that time of wonder and curiosity and, like, figuring out how to do things.
Here's a stick and a rock.
like build something, right? And I think that our society is really lacking imagination. I think that fear limits imagination. I think that lack of your basic necessities impacts imagination, right? And without imagination, how are we supposed to create the world we want to live in?
I'll also say, so like I do this arts program with Ames Middle School, and one of the things that I think AI is really taking away is problem solving, because if you're asking like an AI generator, like, you know, if you're asking them like the answer to the question or even to produce an essay or anything like that, I remember, because I went to Ames, and I remember like being like, oh, I have like an assignment due, and like I forgot about it until like 24 hours before the assignment was due, and then I'm like the night before I'm like writing that assignment, and I'm like super stressed out. But like I also think that this is not a rule, but also procrastination also generates something like unique in my brain that I don't think is like I don't want to in general procrastinate, but when I do, like, typically like okay things happen, which is also just to say that like, yeah, like they don't have, I also think like, while I think fear in some ways limits imagination, fear is also imagination. So it's like there are things that you're creating because you are afraid, and I'm like that to me is also like, there's, I mean, you see it all in realms like 50 Cent actually is a really good example of like his entire first 2 albums worth of his discography are all situations and scenarios that are like
Terrifying.
terrifying, and also like they're beautiful. It's like there's like an incredibly intense beauty in how he is portraying how he grew up, why he grew up so fast, you know what I mean? Like in the scenarios and situations that he was in, also like kind of the disposition that he has now that he is like wealthy, but is also like in a lot of ways like kind of the same machination of being that he was when he was there. So it's just to say that I think AI or reliance on AI removes so many of the feeling motivators behind actions, because it's like I can just go to this, I can resort to this machine to kind of generate, even when we're talking about like generating ideas or generate how to like build up ideas, it's like what is more, I think, nerve-wracking to me, being like, you know, AI, what do you think about my poem? Or being like, Geoff, what do you think about my poem? And I could tell, but it's just to say, but it's like just really like any other human interaction, which is, I think, is like really important, because it's also like, no matter how good AI has the potential to be, I would never regard its, if you could call it an opinion on even close to the same level. I probably wouldn't regard it at all next to like human interaction, or what I would almost rely on AI to not understand the thing that makes my poem a good poem, or a poem that I would regard as a worthy poem to have scribed or anything like that. So yeah, I think that creativity is becoming a kind of lost feeling. because it's like we're seeking ways to be creative, and like I think a lot of the youth is like seeking ways to supplant creativity with, oh, I don't have to draw something, I can just, it's a prompt, like yeah, like we have kids that are like, oh, like I don't know how to, I'm not good at 2D drawing, like I think it was Mr. Arnold, I think it was there before, but like it was just like, I'm not great at drawing, but I know a prompt to that. Oh, just type this in, and I'm like, guys, like,
Instead of drawing.
or just suck at it. You know what I mean? Like it's actually fine to suck at it, and then get better, and then try your hardest. But I'm like, you're not even you're not doing that part.
If I may add a positive note, okay. I think imagination is a gift that we have as human beings, and I think all people have it. And case in point, I'm a teaching artist. I'm working with one of my residencies is some fifth graders in the city. I had this whole lesson on imagination, and they became special agents of imagination. And I walked in, I started that lesson, and I walked in with a stick. And I asked them what it was. And they came up with amazing definitions, of what that stick could be. And that whole, I mean, they were, I respect your point about kids, but you have to ask them, you have to challenge them.
Oh, I think they
And
have
it's-
imagination.
and it's innate.
I just
It's
don't
innate.
think they
It's
have a lot
innate.
of spaces to use
Well,
it.
It is
Yeah,
a
if they're just
muscle,
going straight to the
It
computer.
It is a muscle.
It is something that
That's
like,
the way we talk
That
about
actually
it.
gets very
Right.
close to it. So I think what we're dancing around is the distinction between creativity, the imagination, versus the skill through which we channel our imagination. The skill through which we channel our imagination is art. We can be terrible at art, and then that takes skill to become better at art, but the imagination is always going to be there. And I think our kids have that imagination.
Mathematicians have imagination. Scientists do. I mean, I think it crosses disciplines.
That's inherent to humanity. It's the
Exactly,
skills
yeah.
that AI are threatening.
yeah, I think the thing that's happening, it's a lot like Peter Pan, actually, like the one with like Robin Williams. It's like this, like he left,
This is really good.
like he left like his childhood, like he was like a forever child, and when he left, and then he was like, now he's an adult who has bills and he has kids and responsibilities, and now he's no longer, like, he doesn't even remember who he was as Peter Pan, and like the Lost Boys have to come and like try to like remember when you were a kid and you were great. And I think that's like that. I think in a lot of ways it's just happening. It's short circuiting that process, because now you have a lot of kids that like you're taking things that this used to be like your workout set for your imagination. It used to be like, hey, put a pencil and a piece of paper in front of you and like suck at drawing until you're great at drawing. And then every once in a while there'd be a kid that's like, I'm already great at drawing, and they're like, just get better at drawing. And then, or like it could be with poetry, it could be with like narrative storytelling, it could be with sculpting, it could be with like paper mache, anything. And I think that like because we're taking so many of those tools away, they're not given the space or the opportunity to kind of work out their imagination to the point where, like, now when you're older, it's like when you're older, it's a lot harder to lean on those things if you're not really in the environment to kind of push yourself in that direction, because it's like it's harder to be. Well, I guess actually, so this is also societal, because it kind of depends on like where you're living and like how that kind of happens. But at least in this context, it's harder to be like a fully imaginative artist when you're like, I also have to like feed myself and keep the lights on and things like that. If those aren't things that you're depending on to do the other thing. So yeah, it's just to say like I hear your point, but I also think that there is something that's happening where it's like, if you are not consistently put into a space or putting yourself into a space where you're able to work out that imagination and really like kind of push your imagination, then it's like a knife that is getting more and more dull until it's like it's unusable. And I'm not saying it would be forever unusable, but it is like just like Peter Pan, like you need something to like really push you.
Yeah. Oh, Yeah, and we are a little. We don't have a whole lot of time left. I hate to interrupt the wonderful conversation that's going on, but I wanted to briefly end with a little bit of reflection. You can just pass it around. Since we don't have a lot of time, I'm gonna kind of read that and then offer just a couple ways of reflection. This is a poem I encountered recently by Sujata Bhatt. Called "Search for My Tongue," and I'm not great at pronunciation, so I'm gonna avoid reading the Gujarati in here, but just read it and then offer a couple of suggested reflection. You ask me what I mean by saying I have lost my tongue. I ask you, what would you do if you had two tongues in your mouth and lost the first one, the mother tongue, and could not really know the other, the foreign tongue? You could not use them both together even if you thought that way. And if you lived in a place you had to speak a foreign tongue, your mother tongue would rot, and die in your mouth until you had to spit it out. I thought I spit it out, but overnight, while I dream, it grows back. A stump of a shoot grows longer, grows moist, grows strong veins. It ties the other tongue in knots. The bud opens. The bud opens in my mouth. It pushes the other tongue aside. Every time I think I've forgotten, I think I've lost the mother tongue, it blossoms out of my mouth. And so, with this last moment, I want you to kind of consider those characteristics of your identity that you reflected on at the beginning of this conversation. And considering this poem, which I wish we could, go into analyzing together if we had, an hour or so. But how does language like this point us to the margins? How does the language you use to describe your identity point you to the margins? And how can you make meaning with that language? How can you build a self-actualizing rhetoric, a self-actualizing poetic vulnerability? Basically, how can you be you? And how can you, through the struggles, through the sunny days like today, how can you not just persist, but learn to thrive? And so that's what I want to leave y'all with. And thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.